Well now, there's a lot to talk about in this week's episode as well. And possibly the final episode, which means this may be the final mission for After the Storm. If that's the case, let's go out swinging. I'm going to get into some may take this as a negative criticism. I look at it more from a constructive point of view. I felt like this week was too neatly wrapped up with the rescue. I feel like it's one of those things that you could have made into a three-parter in the context of really make it feel like a life and limb situation. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was glad to see Jeff back in the picture at long last, but it felt like it was too easy and it was all wrapped up, whereas a story arc, a story like this for the context of Longreach, I think a three-parter would have sold it more because it would have built up the anticipation. Now, you could also make the argument that the anticipation has been built up more or less since the first season. I'm going to put it as, your mileage may vary because everybody's perspective is different. I just feel like this could have benefited from having it, drawn out by one extra episode, just so that once the suspension had finally built and built and built and built, and then you get to the extremely satisfying payoff, it probably would have meant more. But be that as it may, as I just said, the payoff was extremely satisfying. To see him come aboard Thunderbird 2 and to see all 5 brothers reunited with their long-lost father, it's like Rasmus Hardiker said, it was a tearjerker. I think it's like anything, if you've been separated from a loved one for that long and then all of a sudden they're back in your life, it's an overwhelming feeling. And I was glad that they were able to bring that together for Thunderbirds. And I like how they kind of make Scott look afar from the situation when he's seeing the rest of his siblings embracing their father. And it's like I said last week, Scott has gone through such an evolution in this series from, being the elder brother of the Tracy brothers, but at the same time he became almost a parent to them, as well as being the leader and, essentially the director of International Rescue. And you feel like his story arc had really come a long way because he's watching from a very quiet, satisfied point of view. It's just like, I got Dad back, And he doesn't overdo it, but you can tell with the way that they did the visual animation, he was celebrating, quietly to himself in the sense of, I got Dad back. The mission is complete. It's an interesting dynamic to have the idea that Jeff and the Hood used to be friends and that they were going to be working together to try and change the face of the world, but Jeff always had these a very strong moral compass, whereas the Hood didn't like the idea of being denied things that he wanted to do. I found it amusing how Sally put Fuse in his place, because Grandma Tracy is not someone to be trifled with, especially when, you know, she really gets self-motivated. And even though the idea of mocking her cooking is a very tired joke, I mean, it was a tired joke by the end of season 1, to see it one last time where Jeff is looking to Gordon after she says, you know, first you're going to go to the medical pod, and then for some homemade cooking, he just goes, help me. Which you can see where Alan got that from in Runaway from season 1. And the pacing, I mean, I think the pacing was on par with what we saw last week. The pacing went at lightning speed, because for a 22-minute episode, it felt like it bolted by within the space of 10 minutes. Yeah. And that's also why I refer to why it felt a little too neatly wrapped, because it would have been an interesting situation if, say, the Hood had gotten, you know, well, he did get control of the Zero XL. What if he had actually gone back to Earth, and then KO gets aboard a spacecraft, goes up to the Zero XL, kicks him out, and then says to Brains, right, we're going back for them. And then they go back to the Alt Cloud and then bring them back. That would have been sort of an interesting scenario. It's like, oh, how could you? And the way that Jeff was able to, you know, to tell the difference between the real Brains and Hood, and the Hood putting on his digital disguise. And I felt like with the way he said, of all the years we've worked together, he's never called me Jeff once. I felt like that was an unintentional reference to the 2004 movie, because in the scene where Anthony Edwards' portrayal of Jeff is trying to wake them up just to get to the access protocols, just to get Thunderbird 5 back online, you just hear Anthony Edwards goes, damn it, Jeff, wake up! I think that's the first time you've ever called me by my first name, Brains. I know I hate that movie, but I did like Bill Paxton as Jeff. I think, you know, for a live-action version, he did it justice. So, for what we're presuming is the last ever episode, I'm hoping it's not, but if this is the last episode of Thunderbirds Are Go, then it ended on a good place, with Jeff being home finally, and the full, you know, package was complete. When you see at the end of the episode, Thunderbirds 1, 2, and 3 are lifting off, and you see him back at his desk, just like he was over 50 years ago with the original, coordinating the rescue missions from it, you know, from his desk. And this is the reason why I'm also dissatisfied with this possibly being the end, is because if there ever is a 4th season, it will give Lee Majors more time and more material to work with to actually grow into the role of Jeff Tracy more, because I think there is potential to see what he could grow into. I know they say sometimes that the end of the chase is not as thrilling as the chase, which there is truth to that in quite a few situations. But I don't know. I don't like what ifs. I like to have questions answered. I'm one of these people, well, what is the answer to that question? I need to find the answer to this. So, if there ever is a 4th season, Come on, ITV, just do us a solid one time. It'd be interesting to see what more he could do, and even Lee Majors has expressed interest in reprising his role if there is a 4th season made. So, writing, there are a few bits and pieces that I felt could have been worked on, but for the most part, for the last ever episode, it was decent. All I'm going to say for this week is the cast, everyone, turned in a fine, perfect performance, even the Chaos crew. And I've had my misgivings with Amy Edwards and Craig Steen for their performances as Havoc and Fuse respectively, but I felt like this week I couldn't fault them. They actually put in performances that, were more than noteworthy. Maybe it's because it's the last episode they actually said, look, really make this count. And, Chris Jarwood as the mechanic, I feel like he's perfect in that role now. He's really had time to get more than acquainted with the character, and this was probably his best performance. I mean, David Graham, what is there to say? He is the Parker. Ron Cook is good as a live action, but David Graham is simply the best for the voiceover. And it was so satisfying to hear Lee Majors do the countdown as the Zero XL was launching from the Orc cloud to go back to Earth. I felt like it was appropriate that when he did the countdown, they were doing it with the musical, with the musical piece put in the background as well. So I did like that, and it felt like it was a passing of the torch from Peter Dineley to Lee Majors. So I did like that. So, like I say, cast-wise this week, totally perfect. There's a lot to unpack with animation. The image of the reunion of the brothers and their father was very touching. And the same could be said with Jeff and Sally, because, how does it feel from a parent's perspective when your son comes home and he's alright? He's alive and well. I don't know if it was more from the perspective of the brothers or Sally, that who was going to be more emotional. It's hard to say. I mean, it depends on perspective, but I felt like that was just as emotional as the reunion from earlier, if not more so. The spaced animation was great, as it always is, and I really liked the way that the animators paid attention to detail by having Jeff's uniform looking weathered. There was wear and tear. It looked like it had been through a lot. And like I said in the writing, seeing Jeff back at his desk, the image was complete. So, animation, just like the cast, perfect. One of the things in special notes for this week is that Sally is a retired doctor, which is interesting, because I don't think there was ever any inclination of what she did before going to Tracy Island in the original series, so at least with this we have some idea of what she used to do. And we find out that Fuse's real name is Clarence, which I thought, okay, that's, well, I kind of figured his real name wouldn't be Fuse anyway, but Clarence, okay, it's cool. The score used during the reunion of Jeff and the boys sounded like a rendition of the track that was used in the teaser trailer from early 2015, when there's no CG and it's just the model sets. And I thought that was appropriate to use for that because it was such an emotional and tender moment. And it feels like everything's come full circle. So to hear that again, like I say, I felt that was very apropos. Seeing Thunderbird 4 in Pod 6 felt a little odd and might have been an unintentional reference to Attack of the Alligators when Jeff actually said, sounds like a job for Pod 6. And if that is the case, then okay. Wasn't expecting that reference, but it was cool. Rasmus was right. The ending was a tearjerker. You know, when you consider all the build-up that had gone into this over, you know, ever since it was discovered that Jeff might still be alive, it was emotional. You know, even though this is a fictional series, you felt like you've been on the journey with the characters as well. And, you know, I must admit, when I saw that, I did like have a moment where I thought, nice. You know, that felt satisfying to see him back in the fray at last. And Alan's graduation felt like a good place to end on it. Because, you know, alright, it's not as emotional and feel good as Jeff being brought back into the picture. But, you know, Alan has grown throughout the course of this series. So to see him go from, you know, part-time rescuer and being a homeschooled high school kid to graduate, and now he's moving on to the next phase of his life, that felt like a nice payoff just for him. And in doing so, the journey is now complete. If that is what is to be believed. I'd like to believe that there is a 4th season and ITV are just keeping quiet about it, but I've been wrong before. So it feels like a good place to end it on the basis of the first scenario, because Jeff is now back in the fray and he's taking up the residence in his office chair as he did half a century ago. And I'm just gonna slowly end this out by saying thank you to the cast and crew of Thunderbirds Are Go for bringing this iconic franchise back for a new generation. And maybe somewhere down the line in the future it will inspire other shows to be reinvigorated and brought back, and maybe 10, 25 or even 30 years in the future, somebody that grows up with this show will be inspired to create something that, you know, was inspirational for them as they are now. Because there are some people that became inspired to become filmmakers when they first saw Jurassic Park or Back to the Future. So maybe some, like I say, 10 to 20 years from now, somebody will look back at, you know, Thunderbirds on DVD, Blu-ray, 4K, or whatever the format may be in the future. They take a look at that and they think, what if we could do something like this, but really bring it into the present, if the present is like, say, 2040? Or what if they actually decide to do a version of Thunderbirds where it's actually at 2065, and they decide to look back at the very originals and then look at Thunderbirds Are Go, and they say they get inspired to do something. I mean, that in its own right is something worth thinking about. And lastly, thank you to everyone that has joined me on this 5-year journey, covering a show that is a nice love letter to the original series that many people grew up with in the 60s, and for people like myself and Stephen Walker in Florgo, Thunderbird, you know, female Thunderbirds-NERD, CAROLYN, PERCY, Jan Solo, hope I got your name right by the way, and to the likes of Gwyn R, that probably saw, that saw, the original Thunderbirds on the rerun generations. This was just as much for us as it was for the current generation that watch this and are just simply amazed by it. So thank you to all of you that have come along on this journey with me. And for the very last time, good night from the night, and Thunderbirds are go. Thank you. Thank you.
MJ Knight. This is Scott Tracy, pilot of Thunderbird 1. Glad you liked the show, my friend. Hopefully we'll be back soon.
It's me, Alan, too.
Okay, Alan. Okay, buddy. All right. FAB. Thunderbirds Are Go.
Are go. Did I join in?
Yep.